Chapter 5 Cormorants on a Dark Night. Scale. Walking out into the night was like entering a cave. It took a while for our eyes to adjust after leaving the lighted cabin. A wonderful night. Clear as mud, I chuckled. I can't see squat, Susan laughed. I forgot it could get this dark. We moved toward the beach to see if we could find the sky and any indication of its clearing. I can't even tell if we're on the path or not, Susan said. Me either. Let's hope this is the right way. If not, we're going to be covered in spruce sap before very long. We could have grabbed a flashlight, she chided. And missed the excitement? Besides, I didn't think we'd need it, I replied. Men drivers, Susan said, with possibly feigned exaggeration. Hey, I think I see an opening. An opening? I can't even see my hands, I said. Well, it's a lighter shade of dark, she explained. Yep, that's definitely an opening in the canopy. Boy, it sure is overcast. We're socked in good. I think I see the opening, I said as we continued to feel our way through the blackness. And that's the drop off to the beach, so we must be at the point on the trail where we can see the break in the trees, at least in daylight. Want to sit down over there a little while and listen to nighttime in the northwest? We worked our way over to the lip of a short terrace that sloped down toward the shore and sat on the edge. Susan, finally, was relaxing and joking easily. The intensity of the conversation inside had caused her some tension, exposing sensitivity to a subject in which years of her life had been invested. We barely settled in when rays of light came poking through the trees from the direction of the cabin. Beams shot erratically at several angles. The source appeared to be from 4 flashlights bouncing down the trail. Either there's a mall opening nearby, or a rescue party is on our trail, I observed. Or a disco party, Susan offered wryly. Hey, what's with all the light pollution? I shouted toward the advancing beams. In an instant, all 4 lights angled toward us, but they were still far enough away that we couldn't be made out because of the trees between us. We thought you hitched a ride back to civilization, Earl yelled back. Yeah, the plane came, but we told them to come back another time, Susan replied. Good, Joe hollered. But did you tell the pilot we're running short on prime rib? In an instant, all 4 of our companions were with us at the lip of the terrace. I thought you were farther away than this, said Becky. Darkness engulfed us again as Becky, Earl, Pat, and Joe sat down and switched off their flashlights. A few moments of silence followed the faint clicks. Wow, said Earl. If I didn't know better, I'd say we were sitting blindfolded in a closet, as my granddaughter would say. It's awesome. Pretty amazing, said Joe. That's kind of how I feel at work these days, Becky laughed. Ho ho, are we going to talk shop again? Susan asked. Well, said Becky, you guys have given me lots to think about. I don't know about anyone else, but I rarely have the opportunity to share the experiences and perspectives with people who understand what I'm confronted with on a daily basis. I feel the same way, Joe admitted. Being able to step back and take time to think through some of these broad questions is a real luxury. Yet dedicating time for reflection and collegial exchange could be one of the most important things we do, if we made time for it, Pat said. We may have been thrown together randomly, but there seems to be a real chemistry here. Maybe it's the captive audience syndrome, but I sense that we all have similar professional questions, even though they arise from different experiences and vantage points. That adds a sort of richness to discussions. I think, as Earl's granddaughter says, this is awesome. Susan, next to me, and several others down the dark line chuckled. Awesome indeed. And kind of like triangulation in radio telemetry, I said. The more azimuths you have, the more accurate position fix you'll get. Actually, Susan said, no longer making a pretense of contrariness, I really enjoy hearing about everyone's work and challenges. It's giving me a lot to think about and put into perspective. With both Pat and Susan agreeably engaged in the exchanges, the group mood lightened in the darkness and quiet of a long pause in conversation. I sensed the subtle change. It was Earl who spoke next. So, Becky, what's this feeling of being blindfolded at work all about? It's not being blindfolded, really, Becky replied, but it is feeling like I'm sometimes operating in a confined space or even a professional vacuum. What is it you're dealing with? I asked. Earlier, you mentioned the challenges of dealing with questions of scale, and that's one of the things I'm struggling with on cormorants, she replied. How so? Earl asked. Well, with cormorants, the management issue seems to have different layers, like layers of an onion. Whether they are political, social, economic, or whatever, Becky said. That doesn't seem unusual, Susan stated. No, it's not that unusual, but management decisions tailored toward one layer or scale may have unanticipated effects at another scale, she sighed. That gets tricky because at each scale, a new suite of stakeholders may emerge. With cormorants, this has become very sticky. How do you determine where to target your decisions when there are management issues at various scales? Joe asked. Wouldn't you focus on decisions within the context of your legal jurisdiction? Earl asked. Good questions, Becky replied. There isn't a simple answer to either. Both relate to our earlier discussion on limits. You might not be able to make a management decision for something beyond your jurisdiction, but a decision made within your jurisdiction could have effects beyond it. You need to be aware of the different scales of the issue and the links between them, I said. Becky nodded. Exactly. Or you will suffer the consequences. Can you give me an example, Becky? Joe asked. This is getting fuzzy. Well, with cormorants, there are several local issues, seemingly distinct, she explained. However, we have a continental population of a migratory species, so management of cormorants at one location may affect cormorants at other locations and perhaps even the continental population as a whole, as well as effects on other species, Susan added. Including humans, said Earl. That's the challenge, Becky continued. For example, anglers believe that a local increase in cormorants is directly related to a decrease in sport fish. That sentiment usually leads to pleas for a reduction in cormorants locally. But that local population is part of a migratory species protected by international treaty. So, any decision then takes on a geopolitical aspect with state, federal, and provincial agencies involved. Also, because population management planning is conducted at a continental scale, subpopulation management has to be considered against the whole. If that's not enough, we still don't know whether management of the local cormorants will merely result in shifting the problem to another area, another scale consideration. Ah, the old solution number one becomes problem number two dilemma, said Earl. I hate when that happens, snickered Pat. A sudden gust of wind sounded like a fast approaching snake through the fir trees behind and to the right of us. The wind gave us a chill at the approach, and again with its arrival just seconds later. The wind raced off down the beach to spook other night prowlers and squatters. A moment or two after calm returned, Susan asked, Given what we've discussed today, how would you approach the cormorant conundrum? By integrating biology and sociology at the right scale? Or scales, I added. That's right, Earl said. You gotta factor in at least three kinds of scales. Spatial, the geographic scope or extent. Temporal, the amount of time involved in a process. And operational, the administrative and political reach of your actions. Nice, said Pat appreciatively. First of all, picking up on what Earl and Joe talked about with the deer and bear examples, I think the best approach is to start with stakeholders and have them define the perceived impacts, Becky replied. Wouldn't that help define the initial scales that need to be considered? I think that would be a good place to start, but biological and social scales have to be considered separately, I said. These both have spatial, temporal, and operational consideration or scales, Joe reminded. Now it's getting complex. Yeah, but think about it, Becky countered. Working with your stakeholders from the onset, you identify perceived impacts as well as other actual impacts. Then you identify the spatial context, the biological implications, and the management jurisdiction and political ramifications. Then you can identify where the scale you're working at is likely to overlap or influence another, I said. And then, said Susan, you can identify the other levels of management authority and the relevant stakeholders you will need to communicate with throughout the process. It's really important how you define your stakeholders in the beginning, Earl added. That would be crucial for getting off on the right foot with respect to scale. It strikes me, said Becky, that you have to be very careful in defining your stakeholder group from a geopolitical perspective. If it's too large, you won't be able to deal effectively with local issues, and if it's too confined, you might exclude key stakeholders. Identifying that right geographic context or community is critical. Now we were getting somewhere. It was refreshing to have such a lively conversation, even though we could barely see each other. I commented that, for an issue such as cormorants, we would never be able to include all affected interests in any given process because the scale is too large. But by clearly defining an appropriate community based on impacts, as Becky described it, we had a starting point. How do you successfully relate to other communities or stakeholders that may be considering cormorant management at different scales? Susan asked. In my experience, Earl said, the essential elements in all this are partnerships, collaboration, and communication among those communities as they engage in making management choices. In the cormorant situation, we'd be dealing with communities and stakeholders that include anglers, outfitters, birders, boaters, and fish farmers, as well as local, state, provincial, and federal governments in 2 countries, Becky explained. To build partnerships and collaboration, you really need to begin with open communication. You could be talking a lifetime to accomplish that, mused Joe. Not really, Joe, said Becky. As long as one takes the communication initiative, is forthcoming with the facts, is sincere about getting input, and is patient with feedback, common ground, common understanding, and mutual respect usually happen. Those things, it seems to me, provide the basis for collaboration. As an afterthought, she added, and I found it's really, really important not to be condescending when giving information or gathering opinions. Still, I said, getting to collaboration and partnerships can be a huge investment in time. Still, even if we're talking a year or two, wouldn't it be worth it if you get a decision that lasts? It seems like an investment I'd want to make if it would ensure that we wouldn't be revisiting cormorant management again a year down the road. Wouldn't that be a novel development? A decision that lasts, Joe laughed. Here comes the wind again, said Earl. Hey, I see some stars, Susan exclaimed. It looks like a front is moving in, Becky said. I wonder what's behind it. Santa, said Pat quickly. February, offered Joe. The plane, boss, the plane, intoned Susan with a nasal falsetto. We had a group giggle at the cleverness and maybe to cover the sheepishness for the tacit admission that we all had watched, or in the case of the younger crew members, seen reruns of the schmaltzy Fantasy Island TV series from the bygone polyester era with a character named Tattoo, whom Susan mimicked. Another assault of wind arrived, but this one was more persistent and chilling. Flashlight snapped on and signaled back at a growing hatch of stationary fireflies light years away. We all wondered what the scale of this front would be, and whether, like the double-edged nature of our discussion, it would layer more gloominess on us or bring clear skies. By the time we trooped the short distance back to the cabin, the sky had cleared considerably. The countless stars, little pinprick holes in the heavens, raised our hopes that we'd be going home the next day. Let's hope that the sky stays clear, and the wind settles by morning, Earl said as he reclaimed his seat at the table. Sounds like you're anxious to leave paradise, Earl, Susan said. Not really, but we can't stay forever. All the muffin mix is gone. We'll have some decisions to make in the morning, depending on how things look, I reminded. Since we don't have radio contact, we probably should get mostly packed and be ready to finish up quickly and get down to the beach when we hear the plane. And batten the palace hatches, Becky added, looking around the cabin. One by one, everyone headed off to get ready for bed. It was a quiet end to a fascinating day of rest and collegiality. I was fairly certain that the quiet had less to do with the tiredness than with ambivalence at the prospect of leaving just after acquaintances had evolved into camaraderie. I knew for certain that was my feeling.